All of us have particular styles of behavior and ways in which we relate to one another. Some of us are shy, others are more social. Some of us are orderly, some of us are more sloppy. When these behavior patterns become inflexible and maladaptive, and now remember, that's what's really important about psychological disorders, is that they're maladaptive. They interfere with the regular functioning of a normal day. So when they become that maladaptive that they cause significant personal distress and impair functioning in the social, or occupational realms, with your friends or, at work, their behavior patterns may be diagnosed as a personality disorder. So it's an important feature to pay attention to, is distress in one's personal life, socially, occupationally, relationships, not just the little things that might interfere with getting through the day, but you manage to get through fine and every day is kind of, a reasonable day. All right, let's carry on with this chapter. All right, let's start with the psychodynamic perspective. And if we consider the traditional Freudian theory, it focuses on the unresolved Oedipal complex in explaining normal and abnormal personality development. More recent psychodynamic theorists have focused on the pre-Oedipal period in explaining the development of such personality disorders as narcissistic and borderline. But we're going to focus predominantly on these more current ones. Now, Hans Kohut, he looked at self-psychology as a focal point, and most of his work was related to narcissistic personality, where he saw that the early childhood health narcissism, which he would describe as the world that revolves around the child, parents reflect back to child nourishing support of self-esteem, always giving positive feedback. Eventually, later in childhood, this childhood narcissism gives way to realistic appraisals of self and others. Children don't receive empathy and support from their parents, develop a source. Children that don't receive empathy and support from their parents develop lower self-esteem, which could lead to feelings of inadequacy. Pathological narcissism involves constructing a grandiose facade, or a cloak, if you will, of perfection, constantly working on it, and the risk of it crumbling if they don't, so they work very hard to hold that up. So that's the self-psychology perspective. Now, Otto Kernberg, he looked at what was known as splitting, where most of the work with the borderline personality individual, a child's failure to synthesize or put together all the contradictory images of good and bad results in a failure to develop a consistent self-image. Therefore, you establish a splitting image, if you will, multiple, and moving back and forth between seeing yourself as all good or seeing yourself as all bad. Now, Margaret Mahler, she involved what was called a symbiotic, views the relationship between infant and the mother as symbiotic, or an interdependence between each other, and the child identity gets fused with the mother, joined, if you will. Slowly, children differentiate their own identity in a sense, and their own sense of self from their mothers. That's the separation, individualization, or individuation. But failure to do that separation is viewed as an underlying cause for borderline personality. Now, this is just a psychodynamic perspective. We can lean into the learning perspectives. And learning theorists, they view personality disorders in terms of maladaptive behavior patterns, and that's a common theme for the learning perspective. Rather than personality traits, learning theorists seek to identify the early learning experiences and present reinforcers that may explain the development and maintenance of personality disorders. And so it's largely, and you'll find this to be consistent throughout most of the disorders we'll discuss, it's around learning certain skill sets or certain maladaptive behaviors early in life, and then later adapting them into adult life. The family perspective
This group of therapists or theorists, they argue that disturbed family relationships plays an important role in the development of many personality disorders. Antisocial personality disorder is connected with parental rejection or neglect and parental modeling and antisocial behavior. And so they look at the roles of family. And again, you know, there's no correct recipe for successful parenting. However, there are certainly, you know, broad strokes of things you should do and broader strokes about things you shouldn't do. And certainly early childhood experiences with family can have a big impact on the development of psychological disorders. And it's important to note here that this is not the cause, that you can't blame all psychological disorders on parents. It is only a part of that puzzle. Let's move on to cognitive behavioral perspectives. The cognitive theory, they focus more on problem-solving therapy, where the role of encoding strategies into explaining tendencies of antisocial adolescents to presume that others mean them ill. In a sense, coming up with changing old thinking into new results, and problem solving to new solutions can help people get to the other side. And so this is often one that works in collaboration with, often with biological, using medication to manage some of the aspects and using cognitive or learning to compensate and complement biological. We'll look at the biological, and here the research on biological perspectives have shown a family link in various personality disorders that are consistent with, but don't prove, a genetic means of transmission. And the twin studies that have been done seem to lend itself to this direction. And again, it's not cause and effect, but it's showing some tendencies of genetic variability to psychological disorders. Now, some research evidence shows that people with antisocial personality not only lack the emotional responsiveness to physically threatening stimuli, but they also have reduced levels of autonomic reactivity. People with antisocial personalities may also require high levels of stimulation to maintain optimum levels of arousal. Now, the research done by Jeffrey Gray looks at reinforcement sensitivity theory, and it focuses on 3 neuropsychological systems. Now, the growing research is from molecular genetics and neuroimaging studies, and it's been very promising. First, there's the behavioral approach system, the BAS, and this is the sensitivity to and anticipates in the anticipation of rewards, that particular system. The fright freeze system, or the FFS system, this is the fear response to a punishing stimuli. And then there's the third system, which is behavioral inhibition system, the BIS, where a sensitivity to the potential conflicts caused by the expected rewards and punishment in a situation. But what's been interesting is they've been able to watch through brain imaging to see which systems get activated, and it's showing some promise in understanding psychological disorders.
Now, the sociocultural theorists, they focus on adverse social conditions, so the things that can go on in our social life that can impact our own personal development, and they may contribute to the development of personality disorders, especially antisocial personality disorders. Now, the effects of things like poverty, urban blight, drug abuse that can lead to family disorganization, disintegration, that is the breaking down of the family through drug and alcohol abuse, making it less likely that children will receive the nurturance, the support to help them develop more socially adaptive and behavior patterns. And so these stressors are associated with increased likelihood of child abuse, child neglect, which can in turn contribute to lower self-esteem, anger, resentment, lack of empathy, and a callous disregard for the feelings of others. Essentially, antisocial personality. All right, there we are. We're done another part. Treatment will follow. And I hope this has been an interesting topic. Carry on the good work, everybody.